Welcome to our event, our panel titled, What is Media Ecology? I'll quickly, and then you're going to meet them all over again. So let me just point out the fact that some of these people are on the NYSGS board. Our vice president is Terry Manzella. Our treasurer, yes, hold your applause, thank you. Our treasurer is Tom Giancarelli.
Yay!
Secretary is Lance Strait. Terry McClellan is also on the board. And there is also the Institute of General Semantics, for which Lance is the president, Tom is the treasurer, Sue Drucker here is on the board, right? Am I missing anybody?
As are you.
As am I, yes, as am I. This is where I always like to tell you that all of the New York Society events like this one are free, and we love to have you. And by all means, bring friends. It's really nice. We're seeing some people that we don't already know, which is pretty cool. Come say hello to any of us if you haven't already. And we also like to encourage you to join the Institute of General Semantics, which for a regular membership fee of $50 or a student membership fee of $25, right? You get lots of good things. You get the quarterly journal, etc., which is edited. I'm getting there. It's edited by Tom Giancarelli. You get discounts in the bookstore and at symposia and courses and things. You also get to come, just for that $50, to the big fall event, which is the Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture and Symposium, it kicks off with a dinner and a speaker. This year it is
Ted Cheng.
On a Friday night in October.
October 2nd.
Thank you. And then it's like a whole weekend of non-stop action, panel after panel after panel of interesting speakers. And you even get to bring a friend to the dinner and the AKML, the lecture, for no extra charge. So anyhow, please consider joining IGS. And keep on coming back to the NYSGS events as well. So, since you're here, you probably have some idea that there is some overlap, which we will probably explore a little bit tonight, between general semantics and media ecology. A lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same people, and with a kind of sort of resurgence of interest, either in media ecology or in some of the scholars who are so closely associated with media ecology. It felt like a good time to take on that question, what is media ecology? And I'm going to give it to the panelists in just a second, but I want to read just like 2 sentences from a book that some of you might know. It's called Mapping Media Ecology by Dennis Cali from the University of Texas. And it's about to come out in a 2nd edition, by the way, sometime this year. The very beginning of chapter 1 goes like this. Depending on the perspective of a person posing the question, what is media ecology, responses either arouse intrigue or shut down conversation. Media, he puts in quotes, media itself is commonplace, but compounding it with ecology places it just beyond the ability of the newcomer to the field to infer what it might imply, which I think is a great way of expressing something that many of us have felt over the years, those of us who consider ourselves media ecologists and are always being asked the question, so what is that? So we have a panel here of people who are going to talk a little bit individually with some opening remarks, and then we'll have something of a conversation. And we're going to, in particular, more so than, or quicker than usual, get to Q&A, because we really want to hear from you. What are your questions? What do you want to know? What can we try to answer? So, I will quickly introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. So, Robert Albrecht. Bob worked for 40 years as a musician and a workshop leader in Jersey City schools and with the educational arts team / Camp Liberty. Some of you may have seen his film, Man on a Mission.
Great film,
right? Great film, which screened here last year, the year before, not long ago, which is about Camp Liberty and his work there. He is the co-author of The Arts and Play as Educational Media in the Digital Age. He's the winner of the Media Ecology Association's Suzanne Langer Award, and he's one of the past presidents of the Media Ecology Association. Tom Giancarelli is professor and founding chair of the former communication department at the former Manhattan College, I always have to say that, at Manhattan University. Tom is, as you know already, the treasurer of IGS and NYSGS and editor of etc. He is a past president of the Media Ecology Association, the New York State Communication Association, and the New Jersey Communication Association twice. He is co-editor with Corey Anton of General Semantics and Politics, a book that just came out, and we just talked about it here not long ago. Co-editor of a book called Baby Boomers in Popular Culture, and author of the forthcoming Searching for the Right Notes, Essays on Meaning, Media, and Music. I feel another book launch coming on when that comes out. Oh wait, there's more. Tom is also a songwriter, musician, and music producer, and has released 4 album-length works with his ensemble Blu-rays, who you might have heard perform here a couple of years ago downstairs with Michelle Schacht.
Who's on the board?
Who's on the board of NYSGS, but is not here because she's on tour, but she'll be back. Terry Manzala, glasses back on, is vice president of the New York Society for General Semantics. She has been fascinated by the ideas of Alfred Korzybski and Marshall McLuhan since her days as an undergraduate at Queens College. Anybody? Queens? Yay. Her interests then and now remain in team building and mass media. These interests developed during her work in the corporate sector. She completed her doctoral training in sociology at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and then joined the Media Ecology doctoral program at NYU. And Lance Straight is professor of media studies at Fordham University, president of the Institute of General Semantics, and one of the founders of the Media Ecology Association. He's the author of 11 books, including Media Ecology, An Approach to Understanding the Human Condition, and Concerning Communication, Epic Quests and Lyrical Excursions Within the Human Life World. And with that, you know who you got, and I'm going to sit down and ask our panelists to just give some brief opening remarks in alphabetical order. That means Bob's first.
Oh, thank you. Good evening. Peggy sent out an email asking us to try and give a definition of media ecology. And I thought about it, and I think it's right there in the title, media ecology. We study media, but we really accentuate that it's part of an environment. And every time a new technology is introduced into a culture, you don't have the old culture plus the new technology. It starts to change the way that we think, the way that we live, the way that we feel, the way that all our institutions. And I think it used to be kind of obscure back in the days of Marshall McLuhan, and then Postman, people still fought against it. And I think now it's just so obvious that everything has changed. All our social institutions, our families, our education, our government, everything has been totally upset and rearranged. And when I think of media ecology, I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I see it as having 2 branches. One branch is very descriptive. It really tries to describe what is going on and what is the overflow of these new technologies. How is it affecting society? How is it affecting our social institutions? How does it affect our symbol systems? How does it affect our epistemologies, the way we gain knowledge? And I think that's really been the main branch of media ecology, really trying to keep up on these things and describing what's going on. But I think there's another branch that's more prescriptive, that it tries to come up with ways to defend us or protect us, or to counterbalance is probably a better word, to counterbalance some of the extremes of the new technologies. How do we protect ourselves from this tidal wave? And that's kind of the area of media ecology I've been involved with, is what do we do about this? I know it's a mess. I know it's changing everything.
Right.
But what can we do? Rather than curse the darkness, how do we light a candle? And that's kind of been my pathway. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. When I first started the program, I went back to my hometown, and there was this bar that on Friday afternoons, all the high school teachers after school, they go in and have a couple of drinks, and I wandered over there to see some of my old teachers, and ran into two of my old English language education teachers, and they asked me, so what are you doing? I said, I'm in a doctoral program. And they said, really, what are you studying? And I said, well, the program's called Media Ecology. And one grabs me by the arm and she says, wait, I heard about that. What do you guys do? What are you, saving endangered radios? But I teach a class, I've taught a class for the last 19 years at my institution. And it really is a media ecology class, but for undergraduate students and people right out of high school, I frame things for them in the following way. You could say that media ecology is a branch or an offshoot of the larger field of what is called media studies or communication and media studies. So what's media studies, right? Having gone to so many conferences over the course of my career, there are people who purport to do media studies who study content. They like to write about their favorite films and TV shows and, the things that are going on social media now, right? It's a long sweep of my career. I don't really watch television really much anymore, and I don't certainly talk about it in the class with undergraduate students. Not so much. But you're studying content. That's not studying media. And then there are people who study the media industry. And this idea of agency, that there are people in charge making big bucks and making decisions and setting policy and making deals, and money crosses over the transom and somebody siphons off a little bit as it goes by. But these are the people who, when you ask about, well, why is there so much violence and action, based movies, and well, it's like it's a visual medium, and we're trying to create interesting and engrossing visuals that are going to hold people's attention, and that's the decision. That's what's going to bring mostly teenage boys into the theater and whatever, watching it since COVID at home through streaming services. And then there is the study of us, right? The study of audiences. Why do we gravitate to the media that we use? Why do we ride the bandwagons of everything that's coming along? We, in this very building and in this very room, we've been talking so much about artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence and all of the ways in which it's wreaking havoc on, everything that we do and think and the way we live. But it's also there's much more specificity to that. Why do people, well, all the way back when I wrote my doctoral dissertation, I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation about heavy metal music, right? And the layperson's version of the question that I asked is, why did you become metalheads and I didn't? Right? They're a very specific audience. My son loves anime movies, right? Who are the students who right? Because again, this is studying us. So content is not studying media. Studying the industry is not studying media. Studying agents, users and readerships and viewers and listeners is not studying media. Media ecologists focus on media. One of the first classes that I ever took before I called myself a media ecologist, I took it at Queens College under one of my mentors, the late Jim Chesborough, and it was called Forms of Media. And what we started doing was a sort of comparison and contrasting of looking at our different media of human communication. And here's a real simple example, and with this I'll turn it over. Again, going back to my early career and so much of it being about television, and people would talk about how, television programming is so unreal. All of these people are really good looking and they have wonderful homes and apartments and they drive fancy cars, and it's so unreal, and they never go to the bathroom, they don't ever wash their dishes and things like that. And I said, wait. The way that moving visuals work is there's a very simple element that's called a cut. A cut on a flat screen, we take one shot and we make an instantaneous transition to another shot. So when two people are talking to one another, well, wait, we folded space. I kind of think of, the Dune movies. We've got a person who's kind of looking this way, and then we cut to a person kind of looking that way, and we accept the idea that on this flat screen, that's two people facing one another and talking to one another. But the cut is completely artificial. You blink 30 times a second, but you never blink in a conscious way, and you certainly don't blink and open your eyes looking over there, right? So that's understanding moving visuals and how they work. And that's the way that we think about all of our media.
Terry.
Oh,
I think the title of the Oscar-winning film, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, comes kind of close to media ecology. But if it were that simple, we wouldn't have needed a doctoral program to study it. The wide-angle lens is there, and what I've been thinking, if I gave a title to my main thrust, it's the method is my message, not the medium, but the method, because, and I would preface communication. Some of us in the program were interested in ideas, ideology, others were more interested in actual technology, and then there's people, and I was more interested in people. And I had heard, and the reason I talked about, I mentioned that I liked the program of media ecology because it was congenial, which meant to me that they're communicating. And we did. I know that McLuhan mainly became, associated with technology, but he also said there's no such thing as an immaculate perception. And to me, that meant there's a drop-down menu of human nature there. And that grabbed my attention. And what I would say about the present day, I have like 3 issues that I think that are capturing my attention. One I mentioned here before, that we're in a liminal space between what was before and what in the world will come next. And so what is the power of media ecology? It's an analytical open system, and I thought the same as Korzybski. So some people loved, technology so much that the idea that we are human technology, passes by what's going on in the zeitgeist, let's put it that way. And so I might call Korzybski's ideas and his practical aspects techniques, and that we're the human technology, we're mediums. And so that liminal space thing captures my attention. And the fact, I think it's interesting, we call it Zoom. Our life has become Zoom. That, it's like we're on an escalator. The time is the same. There's months, days, years. But we feel like we're on an escalator with one foot on the back step. And that's information overload from McLuhan. And I brought up this issue of my undergraduate because I read many of the same books then, read them again in my sociology doctoral program, and then I read them in media ecology. And you would never believe you were reading the same book and discussing it. And it was this open idea, and we were in an exploratory mode. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And I don't know, because there's a time 1 and time 2, as we have talked about in this room a lot, I wonder, people that started very early, and people in the middle, or people in the end, if regularities started popping up. And what I felt irritated about, I call it hardening of the categories, instead of talking about ideas, people would, who said what and when they said it, and there's kind of like conflict in sociology to the extreme that I just understood, of course, the conflict, but I decided it was sort of mental entropy, you know, and that is a big problem. Now, in terms of our society now, what I've been thinking about, our democracy is actually a media ecology situation. We have three branches of interacting government that limit each other in each way. And in fact, I've decided, I think that I've read enough of John Meacham because I've read his books. He kind of gets it. And so I think that now what's going on in society, we now are much more aware of how one aspect influences another, and there's an open system between them. And my last piece is, if everything everywhere all at once, well, if this, you could say the same thing about anthropology, sociology, social psychology, psychology. So what's different about media ecology? It's a broader, more open systems within systems, and it's very powerful in that way. And then I'm not going to read it to you. I have a paragraph about drop-down menus. I also think of it as a biosocial experience, because we are now finding out, literally through brain scans, that by using technology, our attention spans are shortened, the reading studies. So what we touch, what we do, and this idea of the sensory was one of McLuhan's ideas, and so now it's being proven. But I wanted to bring out the point that it wasn't just technology, but just yesterday in online, somebody mentioned that television erased radio, and I said, oh my God, people are talking about this as if this is, you know, ordinary discussion, and it hadn't been, and now it's everywhere. And so everywhere, what was that title? Everywhere all at once.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, to the question of what is media ecology, and one of the answers I've given is that the real question is, who is media ecology? Because in a sense, everyone has their own media ecology or their own take on it, but certainly you know, there are a number of significant scholars, and we do credit Neil Postman with introducing the term media ecology, and when he did, he explained that he was not inventing it and gave no starting point for it, which opened up a kind of game that we play of who is a media ecologist. You know, was Karl Marx one, because he talked about how you can't have an epic poet after the printing press. You know, that's a media ecological kind of statement. Certainly we see elements of it in Plato's Phaedrus, and Postman pointed to the Ten Commandments, and particularly the prohibition against graven images as perhaps the first applied media ecology. But within that, I mean, Postman's early definition, which is the one I favor, is that media ecology, and by the way, when you say is, in general semantics, you know, we kind of echo one of our former presidents in saying it depends on what the meaning of is. In this case, not about sexual intercourse, but just what is media ecology. So we take that with quotation marks and a grain of salt, but Postman's definition was the study of media as environments. And for my money, that's the best definition. It's simple, it is metaphorical, but and suggestive, and I added my own corollary to that it's also the study of environments as media. I just got through revising. I did some years ago, I was asked to do an entry for, it's like the Encyclopedia of Communication Theory and Philosophy on media ecology. And with that, you know, explain, you know, what is it about? And one point is that when we talk about media, And it's quite right, it's the study of media as media rather than as a secondary phenomenon. Let's look at media themselves. But when we say media, we mean a much wider range of phenomena. I mean, the term media is a category. What goes into that category? I mean, traditionally, when we were kids, it was mass media, which meant they left out like the telephone. And folks like Gary Gumpert tried to broaden that a bit to include interpersonal media. But you know, in the field of media ecology, it can be extended to talk about language, which is where general semantics come in, speech, but also the body as a medium, the sensory organs as media, situations and relationships as media, this room, right, you know, physical architecture and all of that as media, and all technologies as ways in which we mediate with our environment. So it becomes a much more expansive understanding of what we mean by media, with the core still coming down to communication, which is why some folks in media ecology think, okay, it's a subset of media studies or of communication, but in my view, no, it is its own thing. It rather cuts across a lot of different fields, including like English and philosophy and so forth, but it is not limited, it's not encompassed by, say, communication or media studies. So the idea is an expansive view of medium. Then folks have pointed to, I mean, one of the major concerns are the effects of media, how they influence us, and especially how changes change things, whether individually or collectively. That's been a major interest for us, and so it is, because otherwise, who cares, right? If it didn't have effects, why would we even be interested? But the idea is that it is, in fact, the leading influence on human history. You know, the effects. And, you know, I would say that what makes us human is speech and language, where we move from tribal kind of societies into what we call civilization, which meant cities and more complex forms of organization. That requires modes of notation and ultimately writing systems. What makes the West distinctive was the alphabet, originating as the Semitic alphabet adopted by the Greeks and then the Romans. That is what defines the West. What creates modernity, what pulls us out of the medieval period, is the printing press, Gutenberg, that is it. And what brings an end to modernity into something that we don't know what the hell is going on. So what do? They call it postmodern, because postmodern means we're not modern anymore, we don't know what we are, we just know we're not what we were, right? And that's electronics. That's electronics, right? You know, that's the transition point. And electronics has in it all the potential of what we call digital, including AI today. It all stems from that. So its effects, but in between the two, in between the medium and we look at its characteristics and its effects, there's a key concept of bias, which means not like prejudice or opinion, it means tendency. Bias in its etymological root means a slant, a going down of a hill, right? If you are on a top of a hill, the bias is to go down the hill. You can go up the hill, it's possible, but the tendency is to go down the hill. Just like gravity, just like entropy, there is a bias, a tendency for things to go in a certain direction. And ultimately, the fourth key term is environment, because medium and environment are actually synonyms. They're literally dictionary synonyms, but we tend to overlook that. And the idea, what that suggests is one, that a medium is not simply some gadget that we choose to use or discard and we have complete control over it. It's rather like an environment that we don't have control over and that influences us. And that's where the tie-in to effects comes in, because when it's not just like billiard balls, one hitting another, it's like the table that constrains and defines the whole game. The environment, it's a top-down kind of causality rather than the cause-effect, sort of Newtonian kind of causality, which is also, if you're familiar with systems theory and, which is parallels and really is essentially ecology, that's the ecology, is understanding that a medium is an environment unto itself. When I use my cell phone, I go into my cell phone. I become part of the cell phone, but also that all of these things create an environment, and everyone, I think, here has a cell phone on them. And that creates a different environment than if we were all here without them. Even if we're not using them, even if they're all on silent, it's a different environment, and we're surrounded by these things. You don't ever have to fly on an airplane, but we know they're up there, and God knows what could happen with them.
Yeah.
We have redefined this is our environment. It's not just the so-called natural or biophysical environment. It's a technological environment and a symbolic environment, because we put words all over, we put symbols all over, we put signage all over, and with our digital overlay, that is adding another overlay onto our environment. You find your way by looking at your what?
GPS.
Your GPS and your Google and all of that. That is part of our environment as well. So all of these things are interacting with each other, including changing the natural environment and changing the biophysical environment and changing us physically as well as mentally and emotionally. So that is, to me, what media ecology is about.
I'm realizing I should have said something earlier, which is, just to put myself in context here, that I am a past president of the Media Ecology Association, and I'm currently the editor of MEA's journal, Explorations in Media Ecology. So I have some thoughts of my own, but
Well, let's hear them.
No, I know. I really have a question for the rest of you, but I'm going to put in context.
Okay.
One thing that I think happens a lot with people who are wondering what media ecology is or what media ecologists do is that I would say, and I wonder what the rest of you think about it, one of the very things that attracted many of us, certainly myself, to media ecology is the same thing that people use to kind of criticize it, which is the way that it's not only very interdisciplinary, that's like not controversial anymore for sure, but the way that there's no specific research method that is the method. We don't do it this way or that way. Every one of us probably did a different kind of method for our dissertation. We were all over the place as doctoral students in terms of which research methods we had to take courses in. Like I did historical research, you did ethnographic research, right? I don't know. And sometimes that gets it sneered at by people who say, well, how do you do it? Why don't you do it this way? Like I'll get submissions to the journal that are clearly not media ecology submissions because they're very formal. Research question 1, research question 2, my hypothesis, now here's what I tested, here's my data. That's a way to do scholarship, and that's not that it is out of the question in media ecology, but it's certainly not the only way by any means. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
You want to say anything?
Is there a question to that?
That was my speech, and then you get to do what you want with it.
Okay.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Terry's got a question.
Well, at what point did the term media, become associated with ecology?
With your father.
Somewhere around the
Well,
time
I
your
was
father went
waiting
to Fordham.
for you to say that.
He never put the two words. Well, Marshall McLuhan never exactly put the two together, media ecology, but when you look at understanding media, it's full of that metaphor applied to the study of media, which is what inspired Postman to adopt the term media ecology, which your father in turn also adopted, although less often than it was the case.
Correct.
And again, he may have said it. Your father may have said it in passing.
Well, we don't know.
Oh,
That's
no,
the thing
we
of who
know
said it.
It was more than that, we know that.
Yeah.
So we don't have to argue that. But So those two terms came together at that point, and then were carried forward by Postman and others. Is that correct?
Well, we don't know because speech has no bones, as I like to say. We have no record of who first uttered it, uttered the two words together. It's not in. I used to try. For a while, I tried to find the origin of the phrase, and I thought. I went around to Postman and to Christine Nystrom and other folks, and I thought that they would know, that they say, oh, it first was, and the one thing Postman said early on was, well, I think it was in Understanding Media, that's where I got it from. Well, right around that time, there was a CD-ROM that came out,
Right.
Understanding Marshall McLuhan, and it
Voyager.
had digital
Voyager,
copies of the
yeah.
Gutenberg Galaxy, Understanding Medium, that were searchable. So I did a search. Nope. Media ecology, not in there. Media environment, not in there.
But
It wasn't in there.
But
So,
the interview, excuse me for interrupting,
yeah,
but the interview with Postman in that wonderful CD
yeah,
on MM, on
Yeah.
McLuhan, was very telling, not only about Postman,
right.
but about,
But you see, Terry, I asked Neil about that based on that interview. And so he said, it's in Understanding Media. And I said, and then I came back and I said, no, it isn't. And he goes, well, I guess I came up with it. Right? It's like he didn't remember. And I asked Christine Nystrom, and she said, I think one of our doctoral students came up with it. I'm not sure.
well, I guess-
Nobody knew. Nobody remembered where it came from.
Well,
You remember Paul Ryan, the videography,
Right,
not the
right.
politician, but when I did the big McLuhan symposium at Fordham in '96, he was part of it, and I forgot the other guy's name, who was also they were part of the new video artists of with the Portapak, when the Portapaks were introduced in around
Exactly.
1970,
But that
and they
began
said
with
said.
John Coken.
Well, they said, we thought we came up with it. And there's a magazine, you can see it online, Radical Software, and people have pointed to that because Ray Arlo has a piece in there, a little piece, like half a page, Media Ecology. And that seems to predate anything. I pointed that out to Postman. He said, oh, Ray Arlo was one of our students, right? And there's even a thing, like you have to go to the educational
Right.
resource database, and there's the Cherry Creek schools in Colorado, in Denver, in the county of Denver, and there's a very early report on media ecology for K through 12, and with these people who have no other identity, except it's like 4 people listed. And I mentioned that to Postman. He said, "Oh, we did some consulting work over there with the Cherry Creek School District." So everything comes back to him and to 1968, which was the National Council of Teachers of English, and the first place it appears in print is in the program of their annual conference, and it's for a program, Media Ecology, where Postman is giving his address, and on, I think it was Growing Up Relevant was the title of it, and that's where he says, I am introducing media ecology, and he says, I've coined the term, but I'm not inventing the field, it's been around, and he lists people living and dead who were media ecologists, and that's the best we can do.
Yeah,
I have
mean,
another,
that is-
can I add something, Terry?
okay, go for it.
Because I don't remember, I also went on a search through McLuhan's work, through Dad's work, and I couldn't find it either. But what he did say is every 5 or 10 sentences he used the word environment,
Right.
Yeah.
because he understood that he was working with the same concept. There's
It's
no
all
question
McLuhan.
about that. There's
Yeah,
no question about
Totally together on that,
that. Right.
totally
It's,
on one
it's,
mind.
it's just that he didn't say
Right,
media.
but McLuhan didn't
ecology
invent
in the same
this
sentence.
either, because you could go back to Lewis Mumford talking
okay.
about ecology, but before Mumford, we go to Patrick Geddes in Scotland. I've mentioned this to a few people here. Patrick Geddes, who coins the term human ecology, and as Postman did, some of you know his, from the year 2000, his keynote address at the first Media Ecology Association convention, you know, where he basically goes back to first Ernest Haeckel, the German zoologist who coins the terms ecology, and before that to Aristotle, who uses the sort of the Greek term, you know, to refer to household. So,
Echo, yeah.
what are you going to do?
Eco.
What are you going to do? I mean, ultimately, what's the point?
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
you know,
That's absolutely right.
I mean,
What's the point?
Marcia McLuhan was a central vortex for all of this. There's no question about it. He wasn't the beginning, he wasn't the end, but he was close as you can come to a central point in what we call the field of media ecology.
100%.
And
So-
to add just a little context
What
to
a
it,
difference.
to add a little context to it, we're talking about the 60s, we're talking about first wave environmentalism, right? And so that becomes the movement that is referred to as thinking about and caring about the ecology. So, you know, we're pulling it out of to use Terry's word from before, the zeitgeist of the times.
You know, I have 4 words when people ask me. The bailiwick is of media ecology is the environment, and form and function. And I don't think anybody gets form and function the way media ecologists do now. I think that that's really how you do something influences what you do. That's the simplest way.
Well, that's the way I put it with,
Yeah.
you know, it's all boils down to the question of how we do things
Right.
determines what we
Right.
do, what we end up with them, and who we become
That's
when
the
we do the
kernel.
things we do.
All in the becoming.
So, and that to me is, you know, that's based on the medium as the message. You know,
Right.
I mean, to me that's the central, if you like, aphorism, because it's not quite a tenet, but of media ecology. The medium is the message, and what we're really looking to is the question of how. It was very interesting. I did a podcast. We have a podcast for the Institute, Semantic Reactions. I did some with a couple of guys from the Coro Leadership Center. And one of the tasks that the instructor does is to have people go and interview people in the industry or in nonprofit leaders. And his one caveat is never ask why. Never ask a why question, right? And it's the how question, which is so often overlooked, but that is the most important. Aldous Huxley said that the end can never justify the means, for the simple reason, I don't have it quite exact, but the simple reason that the means determine the ends that we come up with. And that's another way of boiling it down.
I used to walk from the sociology department where I taught something, and I'd say, this is the why, and as I'm walking, I would know that when I walked into the communication, it was the how, because I could prepare for the same classes with the same topics and just speak about it differently. So it was how and why.
How now?
How now, brown cow.
When,
But can I just say one thing? What impressed me about media ecology, given that I had a whole other place to be, and that's what I think we're here for. Only when I hear what people ask and what they're thinking about and what is on their mind and that we speak about it in a forum do I have any light bulb moments. And that's why I'm here, because it's what you think is what interests me. Because I think that that same sense of exploration sticks with me.
when Lance had, in his opening remarks, did that bit of a traipse through history, Terry Moran has a book, Revolutions and Evolutions, where, you know, he lays out that same history, except that he adds, in the 20th century, not just, well, the 19th into the 20th century, sorry, not just the electronic and electric revolution, but what he calls the graphic revolution, which, you know, when we use the term post-literacy, that, as opposed to postmodernism, does have a meaning. We're living in a culture that is more about images and moving images than it is about our literate tradition and all of its gifts. And by the way, when we talk about the idea of a New York school of media ecology and coming out of Neil Postman and his work, there is this sense of the need to conserve the gifts of a print literate culture and not to go gently into this post-literate world. But so Moran talks about the parallel of the two, the electric and electronic and the graphic revolution. But what I've always looked at is the dates, right? That when we look at the point at which the species had fully developed systems of language, right? That's somewhere around by 40,000, 35,000 BC. The transition from Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon, and I never know how to say it, is it Denisovans, right?
They
And then
live down the block.
They're amongst us.
And then when we get to the systems of writing, as Lance was talking about, then we're starting somewhere around, what, 6,000 BC, 6,500 BC maybe. And then the printing press, we pretty much have a date on that one. The invention is somewhere in the middle of the 15th century, around 1455 is when Gutenberg perfects the wine press that he's turned into a mechanical movable type printing press. And the electronic revolution happens in 1844 with the invention of the telegraph. And so the dates are getting closer together. And these are the four evolutions that everybody sort of agrees upon that really change the teleology of the species. And I always have to ask, and then what? What comes next? Was there, and I think the jury's still out, has there already been a fifth revolution? Or are we already into a sixth or a seventh? And thinking about this and what makes something revolutionary to the extent that it has changed what it means to be a human being living life on the planet, I think is a really important way to pointing yourself down the path of what media ecology is about.
You had a question or a comment?
I do have a question, and I have to preface this by saying I think a lot about religion, but I'm not religious, so take that for what you will. And I'm so curious, how did you handle, as media ecology is taking shape, the questions of metaphysics? Because it sounds a lot like the other disciplines, right? And the kind of Newtonian models and the kind of literate society is playing in a kind of in a set of institutions that have been transformed by the Enlightenment and the Protestant Reformation. They've cleaned out the intercessors, right? And media ecology is so rife with something else going on. And I wonder, how did you talk to people as you went through your different fields, right, about the relationship to religious studies, metaphysics, mediation? Like, what came up, and what did you make of that as you structured your inquiries or methods?
Well, I mean, one of the things about media ecology as a field is that you can work within a religious discipline with media ecology. So say Paul Succo, who is a Jesuit priest at Santa Clara, and a few years ago published a book on media ecology and theology.
Right.
And he's coming at it in a particularly Catholic frame. I just wrote, a couple of years ago, I wrote the foreword for this. He's not a scholar, but he was kind of like a hardcore Protestant. And it was like, can we zoom into God? And his answer, of course, was no. So, for me, I sort of like gave a Jewish take on that, but I mean, he was really coming at it. I actually had to advise him to leave out some of the more questionable points of the New Testament that gets, that we consider to be a bit anti-Semitic in their orientation. But, which he did. I mean, he was very nice about it. I mean, he's actually a painter over in England, but I mean, there have been folks, and there's a very strong following in the kind of evangelical community because, following Postman in particular, because of his criticism of what Tom was talking about, image culture. So that I mean, those are applications. The Catholics have applied it too, in their own way. So, I mean, it's possible to do that. I like how Walter Ong says that, you know, I'm talking about the Son, is that God speaks him, he does not inscribe him, you know, that, yeah, and of course it all begins with a speech act, you know, let there be light is spoken, not written, you know, and so, so there's a lot of ways that it can be applied theologically, where a lot of other disciplines can't be because they assume religion doesn't, you know, you can just examine it as a sort of like psychological oddity or a sociological phenomenon, but we can do both. So you can apply it, you know, back to orality literacy. Jack Goody points out that the introduction of writing creates the idea of sort of either or, which we criticize in general semantics, but the either or, because now you have a text, either you accept it as true or not, which means either you are, say, a Christian or a Muslim or not, and you can't be one or the other, you can't be both and, because of that orientation. And that all comes, I mean, that doesn't exist in oral culture, where, you know, it's like wherever you go along with whatever's going on. But with literacy, we get that either or quality. And with electronics, we get new age, and you can be both. Right? You know, we have Jew-boos, you know, for example, Jewish Buddhists, Leonard Cohen being the famous one, and all kinds of other, you know, strange combinations you can mix and match, and that's all new agey kind of stuff. And that is that shift away from literacy. I mean, the other thing about metaphysics is the incorporation through Terry's brother Eric, particularly, but it was back in Marshall McLuhan's work, of formal cause, which comes from Aristotle's metaphysics, but also aligns with systems theory. So that's another element.
I wrote
Yeah, I was
exactly to this point.
Oh, and let me just throw in the thought while we're still on orality literacy, just a quick point, because I don't even remember who did it, but someone a while ago working in that orality literacy area looked at things like the emergence of monotheism and whether it correlates to the rise of literacy in culture. So there's some of that going on too.
That goes back to Harold Innis. He's
Yeah.
the first one to point out the connection.
Exactly.
I meant this a little tongue-in-cheek, but I mean it. Since McLuhan was a devout Roman Catholic convert, in Christian religious terms, it is not a long leap to say media ecology embraces a humble attitude that leaves room for the Holy Ghost, the mystery that lives in that which cannot be defined within a faith tradition. It percolates with uncertainty. McLuhan said, "Don't take everything I say as gospel." He was testing the waters, and he admitted he might disagree with himself next week. So I was sort of thinking about, is there a connection? And I thought, you know, there'll be other people that have different ideas. But since I was raised Catholic, I know that the Holy Ghost is the mystery of faith. And I know that he went to Mass every day, so I was sort of thinking about that. So it's funny that you bring that up. And then I said, in secular terms, media ecology employs our present state-of-the-art information frameworks, models, and methods. Because I think of media ecology as a method. So, you know, I could go on about how it relates to Korzybski, but it's not necessary. But thank you.
Yeah, I see a hand somewhere back there.
I have mine.
Oh, okay, well, go hard, and then, I don't know your name.
And also is an online. My question is, because we're discussing the then what, we're discussing the very qualitative how question. Now, because a PhD student, now the question is, so what?
Yes.
This might be a very borderline, either stupid or very critical question, but so what? Media ecology, so what?
I'll say it.
That's a good
No, wait!
I like that.
I think,
What'd you
Lance,
say?
you have to answer that question because
Well,
It's
what your
open
book is
systems.
about.
yeah, I mean, it explains who we are, where we've been, and where we're going.
Right.
I mean, it answers everything.
Everything
And if you want to understand why we are the way we are, and you know, why we live in the kind of society and culture I mean, that we understand that our media, technology, our ways of doing things structures everything that we do.
I think.
And that when we're looking at all the changes that are coming and how they are going, trying to get a handle on what they're doing to us. I mean, that's a big so what in my book.
Who we are, right? And we're different who's in a given time, but we're different who's across our history,
Who's from
You know,
Whoville?
Lance, there's several young people here, like really young.
Are there?
You're talking
Who
about
have
me,
not,
right?
Younger than you, Terry?
could be, that have not been exposed to any of this, that it would be nice if they could feel encouraged just to ask a question or something like that. Might
Well,
be
yeah, we have a
shy
question waiting
about
here.
like the person next to me is probably going to kill me for saying that, but whom I don't know. But they're here for the first time and young, and they need to know. So, do you have a question?
Well, hang on up.
You
We've
might
got
have a question.
someone in the queue. Terry, wait. What is your name? Because I don't think we've met.
I'm Jermaine Charles, and I'm actually an undergrad student right now, non-traditional, but kind of expanding on your question of so what, outside of academia, where does media ecology sit in and as practicum in our capitalist hellscape? For example, I think just today they said Meta was found sued because of the addictive qualities, and we look at how social media has changed the way we interact. So where do we as media ecologists come in as expert witnesses? Where is the practicum to actually have impact beyond the study?
Expert witnesses. I think that would be a cool thing to be.
I have an answer. Elizabeth Eisenstein wrote an incredible book, The Printing Press as an Agent of Change, where she talks about all of the tentacles of what Gutenberg's invention brought about. And what she minimizes, and I think I privilege the fact that I come out of print literate culture, even though I grew up in the television age, and read Postman's Building a Bridge to the 19th century and 18th century. Sorry. Thank you. Gutenberg turned communication into an industrial practice. And we have been suffering from the consequence of that ever since. You can extrapolate it all
Also
ways.
been
We've done
enjoying
some.
it.
You don't need me for
Wait a
that.
minute, Todd, we've also been enjoying what the printing press brought us at the same time.
Right.
But I'm not talking about the printing press, I'm talking about the fact that Gutenberg became a publisher of Bibles, and then others said, oh, well, now we can mass produce texts of all kinds, and in mass producing texts and creating mass communication, well, there's supply and demand. Why are you going to print other texts beyond the Bible, to go back to the question about religion, why are you going to print other books and spend the money on the press and the paper and the ink and the typeset if you're not going to sell books? And so then we get into this world of a commercial imperative behind the nature of what we create.
Yes.
And eventually it morphs and degenerates into this idea that what's important is what gets attention, not what is in the nature of what we might have to say or might have to offer as art and our contribution to, the great conversation and the great works of our species.
But maybe to this point, Tom, is Postman's distinction of television as being intention-centered, so that it's, to just take the heat off of Gutenberg here and bring it back to electronics, that it is sort of the electronic media that introduced this emphasis on attention, on gaining attention above all else. and that this is very much, what we see in social media is really an extension of that same process. One of the things we find in media ecology is that people who don't study it, who don't know it, like everything is new. And it's like always this big shock that, oh, this is suddenly happening, when if you bring the historical context, which is so essential, and you find that there are patterns in history and patterns that either are continuous or that extend to other aspects. And so, if you don't do that, then you say, well, it's fucking Zuckerberg. He's an asshole, and that's the reason for it. And if we just change the policy, change the people in charge, we'll have something better. Whereas, what we kind of see is, well, there's something inherent in the technology here, that social media doesn't work without putting an emphasis on attention. That it seems to be entirely geared towards getting people to pay attention to whatever you're putting out there, which then, creates this environment in which we get this vying for attention, in which that becomes the ultimate goal. Now, you add into it, as Tom pointed out, the profit motive, and that, that further deepens it. But one of the things we talked about back in the day, some of you young people may not have heard of it, but there was this thing called the Soviet Union, and it was something called communist, which meant that there was no profit motive involved in what they were doing, but when they did television, they still wanted people to pay attention, because again, that's what the medium is about, and by extension, that's what other electronic media generally are vying for, is that attention. That, I would say to you, is where we make a contribution, in saying that it's not just about the people in charge. It's not just about the corporations, and it really isn't just about the profit motive. There's something in the technology, and you're not going to get out of it through the technology. I mean, that's the problematic part of it. I will say that back in the day, Postman was involved in the question of cameras in the courtroom, and in fact helped to create, helped to squash the idea of, at least in New York State, of putting cameras in the courtroom, for the simple reason that, as much as you might say we'll benefit from access to seeing trials through TV, greater access, the fact that it changes the behavior of lawyers and judges, and presumably of witnesses, is more important when you're on trial, and presumably you can make the difference between guilt or innocence, jail time or even execution, and exoneration. At that point, in that situation, that trumps, forgive the term, that overrules the other, the other considerations.
Could I add something?
Yes, you can.
You said about practicum, and I think that's one of the media ecology question is, how do we sustain literacy, mass literacy, in the age in which we live? How do we sustain orality? Right, because both of these things are really under attack. And I think that's a point that Postman made very clear, is that every new technology does battle with the existing technology for prestige and power. And it's obvious that the new electronic forms of technology are smashing to bits orality, or oral forms of communication, as well as mass literacy. I mean, I think most of us can really conceptualize that there will become a time very soon when there is no such thing as mass literacy. I see it dying among my students.
Except for iChat and
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's literacy.
I saw your hand first, and yeah,
Me?
yeah.
Yeah, thank you, all of you. I'll scout so you can hear me better. I wrote down some remarks because I've been paying attention the whole time, and Neil Postman changed my way I see things a while ago. So I agree we're in a liminal space, and that the time between revolutions is decreasing, and like the pattern will continue or can change. very clearly AI is another evolution. Like if you're studying the ecology, it's like you were on Mars and now there is a new form of life and it talks back. I'm not claiming sentience or anything like that, but like it's there. Like 900 million people are talking to ChatGPT every week. This is insane. And I guess I want to understand like what can be gained from looking at AI as a media. Like I want to understand what the right questions to ask here are. I understand it's about teleology and stuff. I'm going to say some questions and then I would love to hear from you. Like, my guess to fill in the blank of my own question is like, how does the medium of AI change people? How does the medium of people change AI? And then how does AI alter like the teleology of the species? But this feels incredibly urgent to me. It's not like, you know, who coined a term in which year, like, the horses left the stable very long ago, right? We're not in the sky yet, but we are not on the ground either.
I call AI the monster under the bed.
Right.
And the reason I brought up politics before, the government, you know, the three branches of government, you know, 100 years ago, the robber barons were eventually reined in. And if we don't rein in AI in some way, legitimately, whatever, that economy part of it, I was thinking of Jermaine's question. I've been thinking about this issue that there's two levels, the economy involved with media and then media itself. And so it's like a double-barreled thing. And I think that, you know, if we do not rein it in, we're in a big trouble, which is why I was thinking about the government in terms of its three branches and will they wake up or not. And if it takes over, that's not so good. And that's why I call it the monster under the bed. But the economics, you know, we're not economists, but we have to somehow think about that.
You know, if there is a method to media ecology, or at least to talk about a prominent one, it's to ask questions. And you know, and Gohar, you asked like, you know, the most important question of all, right? That when those of us who, you know, came out of the program at NYU and are working on, you know, our dissertation proposals, and you come up with a research question. And what is the significance of this study that you want to carry out? So what? Why does it matter to do this? Because you don't just, you know, do it because this is what, you know, academics do, this is what scholars do. But the idea that I'm sorry, what's your name? Tharn. The idea that any of us up here have the answer to that question. Not a chance. Do we have an answer? Well, we can throw around some ideas and talk about it. But this is stuff that is happening now in ways that are cataclysmic to, you know, the way in which we live our lives and the things that we know and how we understand, right? And you know, as some of us are teachers and professors trying to, you know, work with younger people who are trying to learn and are grappling with this and using it in ways that they don't understand. The most important thing we can do is to avoid jumping on the bandwagon of the kinds of answers that the culture around us is talking about. Corporate culture for sure. Education is, you know, a business, and the way education is talking about it. But we have to keep asking those questions and really trying to grapple with, you know, as individuals, what we can do, and again, as teachers, what we can pass on, or you know, pass on is a bad way to say it. The conversation that we can have with students. But, you know, we're not going to, media ecologists are not going to impact the culture and where this is all going and what the end game is.
Yeah, but first of all, I want to say that, and you might get the wrong impression here, that media ecology is fundamentally negative about innovation. That's not true. A lot of folks who studied with Postman picked up on that and ran with that, but others, a few months ago we had Paul Levinson here along with Joshua Meyerowitz. Paul is very pro-technology and sees this as all very positive, and you can certainly come to that conclusion through media ecology, because it's a question of what are the benefits and what are the costs, and if you can come to the conclusion that the benefits outweigh the costs. I mean, there's nothing inherent in the approach that says that you have to come to a negative conclusion about it. Others, like Marshall McLuhan, at least publicly took on a neutral stance and said we can't really say that, there's just too much going on, or at least we can't say that yet. So first of all. Second of all, is it a revolution? Is it changing everything? I don't know. And in a way, I mean, I think that sort of presentation of what's missing from that is that these are choices that we make in how we approach it, right? It's very easy to say, for example, that the printing press or the alphabet was revolutionary, and it's sort of like when you look in the past, we tend to compress large periods of time, where the changes really happen over centuries.
Right.
And just say that's a revolution. That's why, I still, and I follow Marshall McLuhan in this, is that I say it's electronics. And, you go back to Understanding Media, and one of McLuhan's final chapters is on automation. And that's really what we're talking about here. It's just more things are being automated now through AI. But, at least, so at least part of it is how new is this? How different is this from what came before? One of the things that we're going to look for are historical patterns. Because it's not that, as the saying goes, it's not that history repeats, but it rhymes. And the patterns persist. So let's look to other historical patterns. Let's look for continuities where this is just building on what's been there, because James Benninger, for example, wrote this wonderful, brilliant book called The Control Revolution, where he points to the information age starting in the 19th century as a response to the Industrial Revolution, and that this is where it's beginning, right? You put the steam engine on the train, on the create the locomotive, and suddenly you're going faster than anyone's gone before, and you suddenly have railroad accidents that never existed before, and then the telegraph appears as the way to send information faster than a speeding locomotive, and allows you to coordinate. This is where time zones came from.
And create time zones.
Yeah. And that was something also our dear friend James Cali, that was like one of his early things, building on Harold Innis, was, about the telegraph. A lot of the stuff's there with the telegraph. So we look for the continuities, the patterns that we can find, and ask, what do we mean by AI, for that matter? What is that technology? And let's understand it as an environment. What new environment is being created, and how is that new environment going to influence us? With that comes, the great McLuhan point about what is it extending? Which seems to be the brain. Early on, computers were called electric brains before the word computer was established even. But every extension is also an amputation. What is it amputating? The brain. And they were already getting some of the answers, which always suggest caution. I think another one of our great theorists, Jacques Ellul, brings it home to how does this affect any sense of human responsibility? And this is the problem with technology generally, is the lack of responsibility in technological systems, because who's at fault? If AI targets a girls' elementary school in Tehran rather than a military target, well, who's at fault? Who do you blame? Who takes responsibility? And that is one of the most important questions that we end up with.
I also, just really quickly, I did a paper here back in October where, we talk about AI, and I pointed out that there are 7 different forms, product lines of what we refer to as AI. And, you need to think about what you're talking about, if and need to be specific
if you're gonna examine this stuff.
There's one sentence that struck me that came on our media ecology listserv a few years ago. If every human being on Earth suddenly disappeared, AI would not do one thing. Think about that. We're not disappearing, but that's where I got the idea that it's the monster under the bed, that we are in charge in some way unless we let it take over.
I know I said you're next, and I saw you next, and we'll get back to Gohar, but sit tight. First,
Gina.
Yeah.
Hi, Gina. So this is sort of a comment, and maybe you can respond as well. One of the things that was said is that it's attention, right? It's this idea that everybody's trying to capture attention. But I want to just present the idea that maybe we've been habitually taught that attention is the most important thing. So if you go back to radio and you look at 1917 Creel Commission, Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud, the unconscious, how do we manipulate masses? And we use that through radio, we use that through print, we use that through actors and actresses of the time. If you look at the arc of the technologies over time and how have they been used and weaponized by, at the time, right, robber barons, Rockefeller, that they had to sell the whole idea of democracy to a consumer culture had to be sold to the American people. They had to sell World War I, they had to sell World War II. If we look at all of those, that on top of what we're talking about here as environments, we're in a different environment now. I don't think it's inevitable. I think we have a lot more autonomy than we're being told that we have. I mean, it's in a way.
How much?
I think we do.
But how much?
How much autonomy do we have? If people understood the significance of media ecology and how it actually influenced them, a fish in water does not know it's in water. And so if we're all walking around not recognizing that we are fish in water and that there is a way for us to recognize our own environments and shape the way that they look.
But Gina, I think people overestimate the autonomy that they have. I mean, you might say that a lot of media ecologists tend to be doom and gloom, and I would agree with you. But I think generally people overestimate. You know, they think we just have to get control over this and just choose not to do it, and that's it. And that they're not, I think autonomy is overestimated rather than underestimated.
Well, let's look at large language models in AI right now in students, because it's something that's very familiar to us. Does an individual student want to think about the fact that by using generative AI to do their assignments that they are not actually using their own voice, they're not actually thinking, and they're not actually developing those skills? And in the context of the arc of propaganda and public relations that's been deployed by the government and governments around the world, including information technology companies, then if we can start to take a step and look at the fact that this generative AI has been, right, it's being trained by commercial interests that could very well be influencing my ability to think and make decisions, I don't know that everyone would be so excited about continuing to use this technology. But that's not how the technology is presented. We're being told that we have to use it, that this is the future. Last time I checked, nobody can predict the future. So, I mean, how could we respond from this from a media ecology perspective? I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense.
But propaganda, as you're referring to, is not possible without the technology for mass distribution of messages.
Correct.
Right there. So,
So wait, okay. But so what if we use them differently? Because not all propaganda is bad. So we're in a system that has used them and weaponized them, starting in the 1900s with radio.
Right.
But can't there be a different way to use the technologies? It doesn't have to be this way. This is one way. There are possible other ways that we're not thinking about.
Sure, we can propagandize in favor of democracy.
No,
I mean that's the thing. If you look at Jacques Ellul, just to at least his position, and it's the most radical of folks in the media ecology realm, but his position is that you cannot do you cannot get a positive out of this, you know, because you're still propagandizing, and you sure you can do it for a good cause, but you're still propagandizing. It's the same thing, and this came up with the politics book that you guys did. You know, when I wrote about it, I mean, it goes back to Postman. You know, it's like we want to defeat the bad guys, you know, and
Or maybe we are the bad guys.
well, so, but the only way to do that is to resort to the propaganda techniques that they're using. So, you know, if they're using like a reality TV star, you know, to lead their political party, we need somebody from Hollywood or somebody from television for our party. And maybe they're the good guys and they're doing the kind of policies that we want, but the overall effect is detrimental to democracy no matter what, even though it's in, you know, the right camp. And that is the problem. That, in fact, that is the fundamental paradox that we face today, is that in order to get what we want, you know, in a sense, if we're progressives, in order to get that, we have to use those goddamn same techniques that are actually destructive of democracy as the authoritarians are using, and there doesn't seem to be a way out of that
What about like in The
situation.
Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy goes to see
I'm sorry.
Oz,
Yeah.
and they pull back the curtain, and
Sure.
we see that it's just this man.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, that's what we're doing. That's
Right.
what we try
I'm
to do.
seeing-
Yeah.
Gene, I'm seeing two separate streams in what
Okay.
you're arguing, which is that on the one side, to borrow a Marxist term, there are the owners of the means of production who, you know, using these technologies, using these media, are in control and are in control in an attention-oriented business model, given this commercial imperative that they have to, you know, to corner their market and outsell everybody else and win competition-wise. And then there's us. And I think, you know, when you're talking, I thought of one of the best senior theses that any of my students have ever written. It was the simplest thing in the world. He said, I'm going to find some people in my cohort, my age, who are off social media. And I'm going to ask them two questions. Why did you make the decision to do this? And what happened? And he found 6 people.
Wow.
And, you know, it was just, I mean, talk about, you know, parsimony. It was just this beautiful stuff. But he found 6 people. That was all he could possibly find. Because everybody, I guess, in a way, what you're asking is if we could teach and get through, and these lessons could be passed on to the multitudes, would it work? That's a big ask. You know?
What's the big ask? That we would be able to educate everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as we're talking about propaganda and we're talking about the problems in democracy and the world in which we live in this country today, right? The biggest problem is the degree to which people are uninformed. That they don't know how to properly inform themselves. They don't, you know, and they're making decisions without having the skills and the tools that I think the people in this room have, which is why you're here in the first place.
Yeah.
But
We'll
hope
come back to
springs
you.
eternal.
Yes.
No, or not.
This is a question about electronics. It's kind of a field that I've been in. Armory Schaefer, a noted professor from McGill, wrote a book called Tuning of the World, in which, you know, he describes in context, prefaces by, you know, talking about how the world came about communication-wise, including things like the town crier delivering the news and pre-industrial
Great book.
time. But he also talks about specifically the effect of electricity and frequencies, that we're on 60 cycles. European primarily is on 50 cycles, and how that affects subconsciously how we view things. We're bathed in 60 cycles a second here in terms of this. And the idea of like how to look at a film or how to see something, the idea of seeing something in 25 frame versus 24 frame versus 60, there's a whole difference in feel. And the whole idea is like how much is that being studied as part of media ecology in terms of the context of what people are trying to communicate with the medium, the actual technical medium itself, what you're trying to say as somebody who's working in that, making a choice in that, in one way or the other. There are Japanese, especially the anime world, there's Japanese children, there's laws against the strobing effect, which can actually, elicit physical effects. Doug
Seizures.
Doug Trumbull years ago with Nuster Like Magic did tests where 120 frames a minute was giving people heart attacks in theaters, like test theaters and things like this. So, the effects and the power of medium of all kinds, whether it be sound and light. I'm just wondering if there's anybody who's also studying that in the context. In the same, Tom, having toured the world and played music myself, Marshall amp sounds very different here, and I've owned tons of them, than playing them in London or playing them in Europe, because of the difference in the voltage.
Sure.
They were designed for a specific thing, and there's a lot, there's a lot of big bands, and when they tour, they're bringing their voltage with them.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. So that was the general question. Put that into.
By the way, Neil Young is a media ecologist because he knows how much voltage when he listens to his own amp. He knows exactly how much.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all do that. That's.
No, I don't.
That's what we do. So I'm just asking that as a general kind of. Is anybody studying that layer of this with context and with messages and whether anything's being done that way?
I mean, the field's open to it, and Anne-Marie Schaefer would be considered part of media ecology.
Yeah.
I don't know of anyone specifically right now who's studying it, but I mean, he kind of opened up a whole area of acoustic ecology. But I will say that it's not 100% certain, but I've been talking to Rhea Beaumont, who's a Canadian composer, to do the musical element of our Alfred Krzyzewski Memorial Lecture in October, and one of the pieces she would play, if she agrees to do it, will be one of Schaefer's pieces. And she is a doctor, like a DMA, a Doctor of Music Arts at Toronto, and she would also present. So, and I know you'll be here in October, Randy, so I'll introduce you and you can ask her. She would probably be the best person
I'd love to,
to answer that.
Perfect.
Can I just say, Gina, I've been noticing in social media, and I'm sure you have, a lot of the anti-Trump propaganda.
I'm not really on social media.
Okay, well, the anti-Trump propaganda, a lot of it is fictitious as well.
Right.
And when I called somebody out on that, I said, no, you're making this up. This is AI. As well, they do it, so we can do it too. So it's kind of like it encourages.
Right, but so like we're on a downward spiral of our humanity, and I think that there has to be some kind of intervention so that we recognize we're in this toxic environment and we start making different decisions. And there are individual decisions that we can make, because I do believe in a democratic process. I don't think we have a democracy anymore. That concerns me, So I think there are things that we can do. I'm just trying to figure out like what reasonably that could be, but I don't think it's just attention. I think there are other overlapping influences. Somebody said something about the layering on top. Like it's like another layer. It was early in the conversation. And I feel like we've got all of these layers right on us, and we have to start taking them off and get back to what it really truly means to be human. So if we look at that from a cognitive perspective, rational thought and our emotions. These are the things that were weaponized in the early 1900s with radio and mass media. There has to be something on the other side of it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we're doing is right here.
Right.
Like we're here in person.
Yes.
And talking. And that's what we, we're sort of practicing what we're preaching here, but that's what we need more of, people getting together, community, interpersonal, face-to-face communication. I'm also thinking of Tiffany Shlain, and you know, I mean, there's like too much of this talk about the program's gone, and that's a different thing. There are people coming from all different areas who get into media ecology. Tiffany is not a scholar, she's not a PhD, nothing like that. She's actually a filmmaker more than anything, I mean, out in California. One of the movements that she's introduced, and it was originally called Technology Shabbat, you know, from the Jewish tradition, but you know, the Sabbath, but the basic idea is that one day a week, shut off the screens, you know, turn off the devices, and you know, it's particularly good for folks with families, you know, where you want to just like spend time with people and not have this stuff going on. But that idea of one day a week, I had a student one time, one of my MA students, who said, "I'm giving up social media for Lent." Right? I mean, those kinds of ideas, those kind of practices, and it does go back to religion too, because, you know, at least when we go back to our major religions, and they're all rooted in media environments that were prior to electronics. And so they bring us back. And the worst thing, that's why that fellow was so adamant about not against Zoom worship, right? And you know, it's a thing of, and it's a problem, I think, in all religions that people, you know, like the, a call coming in, you know, let me talk in the middle of the service, or you know, or just you hear the alarm and all of that, you know, and it is this idea of like, just turn it off and go into a different kind of environment. Going back to nature is another way of pursuing that. For Marshall McLuhan, it was art, you know, that, and you know, go into a museum and spend time looking at art. I mean, different people have different, you know, pathways to it, but it's out there, it's available to us, and we're trying to get the word out.
Well, you're doing a great job, and I mean, I really appreciate this, so thank you. I'm not trying to, I mean, I just...
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I love this. Like, I really been coming all the way from New Jersey, like, you know, on the ferry. It takes a long time because it's important to be in person, and thank you.
We appreciate it.
Well, wait, we don't have to end yet. Who else? I haven't heard from you yet.
Central Jersey, though.
So it seems self-evident to me that you know, media doesn't exist in a vacuum, and you know, media ecology kind of being making media sort of the first-class citizen of the field. I know nothing about this field, by the way, other than what I've heard tonight. But yeah, there's no media that exists just because. It seems self-evident to me that it's like kind of a human process that results in media. So my question is, why make media the kind of, you know, something that I see as a human product, kind of the focus of study, as opposed to the humans that produce them?
One of the things we've always said as a shorthand answer to that is, if you look at the whole history of the liberal arts, and the development of, again, this, what was it, John Maynard Hutchins called the Great Conversation. The social sciences don't appear until the 19th century. And so, you know, when does the study of communication arise? Well, in English language, here in the United States, English language education, there's this great schism at the end of the 19th century where the rhetoricians split off from the literature people, right? And so now departments of English in universities, right, are all really about literature. And, you know, you're writing in response to texts. And the rhetoricians go off, and we created, I forget what the original title of the Eastern Communication Association was, but it was the first one in the United States in 1908, and then we have the development of what later becomes the Speech Communication Association, right? So that's rhetoric, that's the rhetoric people. And then where does the study of media come from? Well, it sort of comes from the stuff that you're talking about propaganda after World War I and in the 1920s and into the 30s with film. And then sociologists start to get interested in mass media with radio and certainly with television. And so then we have the beginning of these mass communication programs really around the middle of the 20th century. Okay, why am I talking about all of this?
Yeah, why?
Because on the one hand, what you could say is that in all of these disciplines, right, that are prior to the study of communication and media, well, they might be addressing questions about, right? Sociologists, anthropologists might be addressing questions, social psychologists, about media and its impact and effect and influence in our lives, consequence in our lives. But we can say, well, but all of you are using the tools of learning and knowledge that are based in language, and we study the nature of language.
Right.
Suzanne Langer in the 1930s wrote a book called Philosophy in a New Key, and in her opening chapter, she talks about the fact, here are philosophers asking the question, but how are we here? And, how does this all exist? And she said, well, we're asking that question through language. And language is a completely limited thing, and it limits the questions we can ask and the answers that we can come up with. And so why are you all thinking that your disciplines are more important than this one? Maybe this is the overarching discipline.
But maybe just to this, because you ask, what is it, why don't we study humans? What do we mean by humans, right? The subtitle of my book on media ecology is an approach to understanding the human condition. So you say, what is the human condition? Fundamentally, what makes us human is the fact that we have language and speech and symbolic form that that is what, more than anything, what distinguishes our species. For Alfred Korzybski, the founder of general semantics, that meant that unlike any other form of life, we are able to communicate over time, pass on knowledge over time, make progress over time. That the animals out there, the squirrels over in Gramercy Park, are doing what squirrels did 500 years ago, but we're not, right? So the fundamental thing that makes us what we are is the way that we do things, and the way that we continually change the way that we do things, and how that feeds back into us. Right? So one of the fundamental questions for us is, what is it that makes us human, and how do we retain our humanity then in the face of this technological onslaught? And that is what motivated Postman in particular. So I don't know what other answer you might have, and you're certainly welcome to come up with different answers to those kind of questions. But for us, that's where it lies, and that's why we do what we do.
And the roots of this civilizing process in our species, and what brought us dominion over the planet and the rest of species on the planet, is what we're doing in this room right now.
Yes, you two back there, who you want to fight it out? Who should go first?
I
Okay.
don't mind. But there were three things that I wanted to say briefly. The first one is what Gina was talking about the technology and stuff. I think it's weird that we haven't said that the technology itself has become more addictive. Like, the medium has changed. Like, when I was a teenager, if you were using like MySpace, like text-based stuff on the computer.
I love MySpace.
I love MySpace. It's less addictive than short-form video, though. It's like the difference between like a candy bar and crack cocaine. Like, this is not trivial. because people are choosing this. The problem isn't that people. I know a lot of like tertiary educated people, and they all want to quit Instagram. No one's quitting Instagram. Like, it's the gap between knowledge and action matters a lot, I think. The second thing is about whether it's a real revolution with AI. And I think my case for this would be, even if you date it to the 1960s with like Eliza, the original like program that was pretending to be a therapist, the reciprocity seems important. The fact that like in the past you can have a parasocial relationship with TV characters, radio, even social media, but now it can speak back in an important way that's not just projection. It feels to me like that might be a case for drawing a meaningful line in the sand. And then the third thing I wanted to say is about the crisis of meaning, which feels very real to me. I keep hearing that like foundational to the human condition is our ability to use language and to coordinate around that, maybe throw in tool usage as well. And the point with the AI is that it does seem to be empirical evidence that we are not the only entity, broadly defined, that can use language, whether or not it's derivative from human language. And like, you said you can switch off the machines, or all the humans disappear, like the machines don't do anything. Like, I think that's true right now. I think the way that the capitalist incentives are going, this may not be true in future. Just like, I don't know what to do with any of that information, but those are things I thought.
But you see, where we draw lines in sand is what we do. And that's the point, right?
Right.
You know, that we can divide things up differently. Right? You can take a broad view and group things together, or we can look at it more narrowly in smaller slices. And that's just, I mean, that's a matter of how we're going to approach it. It's not an absolute. The reason that you know, so many of the earlier media ecologists pointed to television was not that television itself was so different. After all, it was radio with pictures. It was movies being transmitted. But because suddenly, going into the 60s, it's like, you know, it's like, holy fuck, everything is changing. What is going on here? You know, it's like there's this whole youth movement that's going on. There's the civil rights movement taking off. There's women's liberation. That's what they called it back then. There were movements for educational reform that Neil Postman was involved in, and the anti-war movement. I mean, it's like everything is changing, and people's minds were boggling, and that's where Marshall McLuhan came in, and he said, there's an explanation. We have this new generation growing up with television. It's changing the culture radically. You know, so, but at the same time, he also said that those changes are not just sudden, but they can be traced back. We can see the beginnings of them with the telegraph and with these other technologies going back to the early 19th century. Right? So it's really a matter of where you want to draw your lines, not, you know, so you can say, sure, AI may be like this extraordinary revolution, but we don't know that yet, right? But we do know that there are continuities with the past, and we've yet to see what the results may be. So let's be cautious absolutely, and let's pay attention, absolutely, but we don't know. But, you know, you want to call it a revolution, that's fine. People want to call social media a revolution, digital media revolution. I don't bear a grudge against that. I just think that I see electronics, for me, that works as you know, the way to periodize it. But, you know, I mean, we could talk about the media environment here in this room. We could talk about the media environment today in the United States or in the world or in the 21st century. It's how we choose to divide things up, because there are no lines in nature. It's a general semantics point. You know, there are no dividing lines except the ones that we use for our convenience.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring this to the room as study of media ecology. We make the assumption that it starts with mass media, or we made that determination, I should say. I took a class at NYU last semester called Media and the Culture of Money. It talks about currency as a medium and a symbol of communication, be that barter, coins, digital currency, and the shifts in that also impact how we interact with each other, look at regulations around contract law, counterfeit. Is anyone digging into that in a deep way from the media ecology perspective?
Go for it.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, you know, Understanding Media McLuhan has a chapter, you know, of money as the medium of exchange. I mean, I know others have done it more recently, but, you know, certainly in paying attention to the digital, you know, and the shift away from physical money into electronic. Well, Doug Rushkoff wrote about this.
And by the way, and it doesn't start with mass media, right? The movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, in the first part of the what's the section called?
Dawn of Man.
Yeah. Picks up a bone and realizes, well, look what I can do with this. And in the next scene, right, it could be a tool, but no, it becomes a weapon. And I also argued at one point in the paper that it also is the beginning of music. The original instrument is percussion. It starts there, right? It starts when somebody cut their finger and wiped the blood on the wall and said, ooh, you know, right?
But, you know, as far as money, I mean, Lynn White Jr. wrote about this. and he was a medieval historian, also cited by McLuhan, but this was in an article that he wrote. But he points to the first coins came from the kingdom of Lydia. Now the significance of that is that they were right next door to Ionia and Aeolia, the Greek colonies in Asia Minor, where the Semitic alphabet was first adopted and turned into the Greek alphabet. So we see the influence of the alphabet there in the idea of coins, which is, just as a writing system lets all speech be reduced into a common set of characters, all goods could be reduced into a common sense of coins, right?
Just historical note, there's a very lovely New York Times article by Marshall McLuhan about inflation around the Bretton Woods period. And so he's talking about the interval, and it's got a great cartoon of a slugger. And so there's something going on with thinking about those gaps and intervals and inflation that I think is right for media ecological work.
What year was that?
1973 or 4. I mean, it's really Bretton Woodsy. Like, it's just a little blip, but he wrote about it a few other places. Yeah. Nobody's done it before.
Well, this feels. Oh yeah, one more.
It's just to try to link. My name's James. I'm a management consultant. I know nothing about any of this, but I'm interested in it. I'm trying to link what I'm hearing here, because we're in New York City. As you can tell, I'm not a native New Yorker. But there are two things going on here in this city. One is that if you fill up your car with gas, you're given two prices. One with cash and one with credit. So what's going on? Nobody else in the world does that. In fact, very few people in the United States do that. You've also got this week your glorious new mayor, my glorious new mayor, Bondani, who's making it obligatory for retailers to accept cash. I work with the UN and the government's advising them on humanitarian aid, disaster management stuff. Been working lately with the Syrian government, who have just introduced a new currency as part of their financial inclusion strategy, because they want this new country to be brought together and not keep on fighting itself. And they're seeing currency as a medium for political stabilization. What nobody understands in Syria, in the UN, in the central bank of Syria, or in New York City, is the semiotics of what a banknote actually is achieving. So, before this evening started, I asked Lance, rather tongue-in-cheek, is there a school of monetary ecology? And there isn't, not that I could find anyway. He put me in touch with some interesting things. So,
we just asked if anyone used that phrase.
yes, the phrase is there, but as a school of thought, as a discipline, I would find it really useful to have such a thing, so that when I have a conversation with the Central Bank of Syria, as I did last week, we can have a semantic conversation beyond store of value, capital, movement of, and transacting medium.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to invent it. So Terry's not here, but I'm going to claim it. Oh, you are here.
We get a cut. We get a cut of that.
There's no confusion.
You owe us a cut.
He always said, what's current creates currency.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah, I have to think about that.
But I mean, just on this.
Can I pose my question?
Yeah.
I'm okay. I'm okay. As a chairperson.
He had too much to drink.
I'm trying to make the point that there is something practical to do. It's not all AI at this end. And it's not all about the perils of digitalization. There are movements about how to keep cash in society, because it's the last artifact that can do this, apart from the other printed media. And it doesn't just bring in literacy, by which people think, we have trouble with the word, as we discussed this evening, what ecology means, but literacy, there's something called numeracy, because banknotes have numeracy as well.
Right.
So the history of zero and how a $10 bill in Louisiana became the Dix and therefore Dixieland, and you know, all these links and why presidents are not on dollar bills. They really matter today. So the history coalesces, but if nobody fights for the continuation of cash, we're going to lose it. And the UN runs something called the Better with Cash Alliance, which is funded by Citibank and the MasterCard people, and they're trying to kill cash. And they're winning. Of course they're going to win, because we have no money to fight against them. The power of ideas is not enough. Unless a forum like this gives it academic coalescence so that it means something and it can be quoted. And I'm positing, my question is, should this be positioned within a society of general semantics or media ecology or both? That helps.
The thing I want to point to, I mean, and this comes from Doug Rushkoff's work as well, but that before electronics was applied to monetary systems, to have cash, you know, involved a certain amount of means of production, big printing presses to run off paper money, which itself was seen as suspect before it was, you know, gold coins or silver coins, which were worth their weight in the precious metal. When we go, though, to electronics, that opens the door to ending government monopolies on money, which existed previously. And with that, we get this whole thing of like cryptocurrency, for example. In one sense, you know, an early sort of promoters were like, this is wonderful, we end the government monopoly, we can all, you know, we don't have to sort of kowtow to governments to use a medium of exchange. But what we're seeing here is some of the really negative consequences of that shift as well. But that's part of what that opens things up, as electronics has, you know, to use Harold Innis's term, has ended the monopoly of knowledge, the monopoly held by many institutions in the previous print era. So I mean, this is certainly part of what's going on today.
I know we're running long here, so I want to, before we thank our panelists, offer to you the suggestion that if you want to pursue this more, now you know a little more about what is media ecology, do you want to know more than that? Maybe you also want to jump in with what your suggestions would be, but my main one would be to find the Media Ecology Association online. Our website is media-ecology.org. You think I know that by now. Where you'll find resources like a bibliography. You know, you've heard 30 different authors' names come up just tonight, and that's just some of them. There's an opportunity to ask for what we call a virtual coffee, like if you want to talk to someone some more, someone in media ecology whose interests align well with yours or with something that you want to know more about, that's there. Ways of reaching us and others, people on the board, that might be a good place to start or to continue. There's a book series, a media ecology book series that Lance edits, right? It's with Peter Lang, publishers. There's the journal Explorations in Media Ecology.
That you edit.
That I edit. Yeah, that Lance edited for many years. Anything else in particular that you would point people toward?
Well, the New York Society and the Institute of General Semantics is a place where a lot of media ecology goes on, and we consider general semantics to be part of media ecology.
Right. Yeah.
I have one question here that might be applicable for a couple folks that come to this room and come to media ecology, yes, through like the lens of academic curiosity, and interest in a topic that explains so much of the world, but also are coming to media ecology with a, for better or for worse, like a practitioner's eye and focus, and are people who ostensibly make media. And I'm curious, like, if there's any specific recommendations for next steps or follow-ups you have for, like, the practitioners amongst us, like ways that you could not weaponize, of course, but like use the ideas that underpin media ecology as a source of insight for yes, I will be normative here and say making media better, not just, not like weaponizing the ideas. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It does.
depends upon what media form you're using. It depends upon what content you're creating and what your purpose is.
So let's say like you write online, like you write articles online.
Mm-hmm. And write articles about what and for whom and with what purpose.
Yeah. But there's no like one size fits all like recommendations for like that type of person you have for like how to how to use the ideas of media ecology beyond, yes, like it sounds like one of the takeaways from this conversation is that there's almost like a permaculturalist logic that can be attached upon the ecological logic of media ecology, which is like, similar to in the late 60s and early 70s when there was like a back to the land movement. You could take your prescriptions for how media ought to be that is a product of media ecological thinking, and you could say, yes, we'll do a digital Sabbath or whatever that was talked about earlier. You can make prescriptions here and there. That seems to be one takeaway. But I'm curious if,
Can I offer a response to that? So I actually work for a major audiobook publisher who currently has this ethos of every book ever in audio in every language, every territory. And we're currently doing global expansion, right? And I remember when some of our executive all hands meetings asking, like, have you thought about the impacts of that? When we go into the Middle East and make certain texts available that have never been available before in print or any other medium, have we thought about the political and social circumstances? And the answer is, oh yeah, we haven't, not really. We probably should, but priority is profit motive. So like, this is where I feel like our lane is to try to intervene with that and intersect that somehow. I don't have the answer for how to do it, but I think that's the practical that I was referring to earlier.
There's a famous line of poetry by a Spanish poet, Caminante no hay camino, se hace el camino al andar. You kind of have to make your way. There is no world.
Yeah.
No, you got to figure it out yourself. And I think that's the challenge. What feels right to you? So it's like we can't tell you what to do that.
I thought that would be the answer.
But for a writer, it's get people to pay attention, wake the fuck up, and look around you and see what's happening, and don't stop sleepwalking through all of this. One of the fundamental things is that the reason that these things become environmental is that they fade into the background. We're not paying attention. They're just part of our daily routine. It's like, look up, look at that light. Right? And nobody's looking at it, right? And how interesting is it that we have light, that we have electricity? Try to recapture that sense of wonder, but the strangeness about the world. When you see airplanes up ahead, up over us, think about how odd that is, how strange that is. And that's what we need to recapture as well. And it's just like, pay attention. That was like the first step for McLuhan, for Postman, for all these folks. It's just wake up.
Yeah, well, that's probably a good place to end, right? I want to thank our panelists and thank all of you for coming. Please come back, watch the website for announcements about our next event, which we haven't set the date on yet, right, Sue? But we will very soon. And it'll be like